failures of Kurdish history. The balance of forces was in favor of the Iraqi Kurds. They should have realized this. End of quote. On an international level, Ghassanlu's understanding of the ways of the world and his close ties and relations with politicians, journalists, and academics in Europe and beyond gave him a pragmatic approach that others lacked. He was able to justly win the ears, if not the support, of foreign powers. He always maintained his independence. Ghassanlu never accepted the idea that a leader could sell out his Kurdish brothers across the border for the sake of personal or parochial interests. He had not forgotten the lesson of the Kurds in Iran who had been abandoned by their brothers to the hands of the Shah. And let us not forget how similarly, years later, after his death, the Islamic regime in Tehran was given a free hand to operate militarily against Kurds inside Iraqi Kurdistan. Even though it led an armed struggle against Iran, Ghassanlu's party was perhaps the only third world revolutionary movement that opposed popular terrorist methods, especially at that time. About this he said, open quotes, "As a democratic organization, we have always opposed all acts of terrorism, be it hijacking of planes, taking hostages, putting bombs, or any action that threatens the lives and security of civilians. To renounce our principles and thus lose our image as a responsible, democratic, and humanitarian party in return for fleeting publicity is both vain and useless." Close quotes. Not only did he oppose any hostage taking in the 80s, but he was instrumental in the liberation of several French hostages and even paid for their freedom with weapons in one occasion and another monetarily. Trapped by the geopolitical situation of Kurdistan, Ghassanlu had lived and worked in Iraq on and off and maintained contact with the Iraqi regime. Yet he never collaborated with Baghdad against Iran or the Iraqi Kurds. According to Jalal Talabani, when the Iraq-Iran war began, the Iraqi government invited Ghassanlu to form a Kurdish state. They offered him money and weapons. Even the budget for the future Kurdish government would be paid by the Iraqis, who would recognize it. Baghdad wanted to divide Iran, but Ghassanlu responded that he wanted democracy and autonomy within the Iranian state. He was in a difficult position regarding Iraq. In private, he spoke about the horrors of the regime, yet he was obliged to be discreet about it publicly. He had also foreseen his own end. For years, he had thought about writing his autobiography, but the amount of work and the internal problems of the party did not allow him to do so. A year before he died, Ghassanlu told me that if he ever wrote his story, it would have begun like this. On many occasions, Kurdish leaders have been assassinated due to treason by the Persian authorities. It happened with Jafar Aga, and later with Sibko, one of our most important contemporary leaders. While Sinko's blood ran through the streets in a nearby house, a boy was being born. That boy would be me. Did it really happen like this, I questioned. No, he answered. Simko was murdered in June 1930, the same year I was born, but not on the same day. But do you realize how strong that beginning is? One, a Kurdish leader dies, and at the same time, another is being born. Some Kurds believe that if Ghassanlu had lived, he would have been able to further the cause for all Kurds. It is difficult to say today what role he could have played. Still, he is very much alive 20 years after his murder. He has become a symbol of resistance to the Islamic regime. Every July 13th, the day of his murder, Iranian Kurds commemorate him. Last year, despite threats from the regime, there was a general strike in the northwest Kurdish provinces that defied the regime. As the protests in Iran have rolled out, Ghassanlu's political message echoes alive in the country. Unity and dialogue, democracy and respect for the rights of the minorities in the country. One thing is very certain. Throughout his life, Abdul Rahman Ghassanlu never limited himself to being just an Iranian party chief. He lived as a far-sighted leader and above all, a Kurd who held a dream for Kurdistan and overarching love for his people, in the end, giving up his life while reaching for that dream. Thank you.
Thank you, Carol. Sharif, please.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Kate, for that wonderful piece, and thank you for your introduction. And we thank you, Middle East Institute, for hosting this event, for this unique event that we rarely see or hear the issues of the ethnic groups or ethnic minorities or national groups being discussed at such a venue. And so we greatly appreciate Middle East Institute's efforts, and especially Kate's giving us the opportunity to discuss such an important topic that concerns more than half of Iran's population. Yes, what goes on in Iran right now and what has going on in Iran concerns everyone else at the national level, but it's very important that we focus on the issues of minorities, as I said, who make up more than half of Iran's population. What the current situation and the current events in Iran has grasped a lot of attention internationally, and it has once brought the issue of Iran into international arena, and Iran's issues and Iran's being in the media and international agenda. It's always been about Iran's, at least in the last 5-6 years, it's about Iran's nuclear program. In the past, for the first 20 years, it was all about human rights, with the issues of the minorities, whether it's ethnic or religious, being discussed on the sideline. But right now, Iran is the discussion about Iran's futures mostly has to do with Iran and the future of Iran and the hopes for a regime change that could be inclusive, that could be democratic, and that could coexist with its neighbors peacefully. I will discuss the stance and the positions of the Kurdish and other ethnic groups, but in particular the Kurdish national groups within Iran in regard to the current and contemporary events and the uprisings and the protests in the last 8 or 9 months following the so-called elections that led to the not only the mass protests but also a crackdown on opposition and peaceful protesters. But I wanna get into a bit of a short history in regards to Iran's various phases. If you look at Iran in the last 3 decades, Iran has gone through various phases. In the first 10 years, or the first phase I would call it, is Iran faced an internal upheaval. It faced a challenge between where Iran is heading right now and where it's supposed to be heading in terms of a change, because people came to participate in the revolution of 1979, not to have an Islamic government, but to get rid of a monarchy, to establish a meaningful and democracy. And so the first 10 years was a struggle between the national groups or democratic groups seeking meaningful democracy and within Iran, and on the other hand you had the clerics who were much against these ideas, and so there was